Awesome. All right, welcome everybody. This is we're just gonna go through and talk markets. It is let me make sure I have the date right. Is it the 18th? Yeah, geez, oh man. It is the 18th, March 18th. Absolutely crazy. Time is flying. My birthday is right around the corner. So, what do I want for birthday? I want a Bitcoin at $100,000 or like $53,000. Give that to me. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, honestly, yeah, I would 100% take either one for my birthday. Um, but anyhow, so with where things currently stand, let me actually go through and remove the fib MA for just a little bit. We'll probably bring it back here in just a little bit. But this last week, this did end up going through and closing as a long-legged doji, meaning that generally for trend continuation one way or the other, it will generally be decided based off of does this week's candle close bearish or does this week candle close bullish? If it ends up going through and closing in a bearish way, generally what we would see about roughly about 70% of the time is that whatever trend we were in, it could be viewed as a trend reversal. Now, as far as this overall market cycle, we need to keep in mind that so far the worst pullback we've seen is 22.5%. Okay. With that being said, if this week ended up going through and closing bearish, to say that a potential 20% correction is, on the table, it 100% would be. And that, if the trend of just a 20% correction ends up going through and holding true, then at that point in time, again, probably worst case would be that we come through, we maybe deviate $60,000, get back above, and then it's then, off to the races, up only mode again. If this time ends up potentially being a little bit more significant, more akin to prior cycles, then at that point in time, maybe we could look at a 30% correction. Maybe we could go through and look at a 40% correction. But let's not get overly bearish. We are in a bull market, and we need to recognize it for exactly what that is. And generally, more often than not, we will see moves toward the upside after a brief cool off phase whenever that goes through and takes place. And honestly, I think that we could potentially be in at least a shorter term cool off, maybe a little bit more of a continuation of a pullback. And again, I think a lot of it is going to depend on how this week closes. If this week closes even in a slightly bearish manner, a slightly negative manner from when it went through and opened, it could be the week after we end up seeing maybe the continuation or the completion of potentially a 20% pullback before going through and continuing on from there. Um, the other thing to kind of take note in regards is that as far as the FIB MA goes, so far we are holding support at the yellow band. Now that is a relatively bullish signal because generally when we go through and we start to cross above any of these levels or potentially hold them as resistance, it can signify potential shifts in the market. Prime example being that, when we went through after the last bull market's peak and we started to hold the red line as resistance and really ended up going through and pushing us down, we did fall through the orange line, but we ended up finding support at the yellow line, which is where we ended up going through and moving on higher from there. But again, crossing below the yellow line near the prior all-time high, we ended up coming through, finding the blue. The blue line ended up holding for a little while, but we did end up going through and falling below that, and that is what led towards basically the larger capitulation that brought us into basically the bear market lows, which were the greatest time to go through and accumulate for this cycle. Um, but honestly, with where that kind of brings us, if we end up going through and maintaining support at the yellow line, again, we could have wicks, but I would say as long as bodies are closing above the yellow line, then at that point in time, we would more than likely see continued bullish momentum coming in towards the orange line. Now, I know I've said this week after week now for several weeks now, but again, I want people to just be aware that this is going to be kind of that concerning level. Um, uh, the very first cycle Bitcoin went through and very far exceeded above this. Again, we're using this as essentially a risk metric for the most part. We were several bands above the highest risk level. The following cycle, we only came in basically about three three or so risk bands above the highest risk level, whereas this one we only came in at about half of a band. The cycle that we just came out of, the 2021, we just barely went above the red band. In some cases, you could say about a third or so. So generally, the trend that we are seeing is that from one cycle to the next, we are diminishing basically one band lower each time, meaning that this cycle I will be paying very close attention to the orange band. Now, on the plus side, the orange band is already over $100,000 with where things currently stand. It's not, at 150, it's not at 180, it's not at $200,000 or anything, but it is at the orange band. Now, for Bitcoin specifically, this would be kind of that level that I would anticipate there to be very significant points of resistance once we start to go through and get near this level. Should we end up going through and essentially breaking past the other, essentially concerning area, which is that 5.4 theory that, we've gone through and we've talked about with just when we're just using math from cycle to cycle, this 5.4 diminishing factor that we end up going through and finding from each cycle, which actually puts, if that ends up going through and holding true, Bitcoin basically between 75 to $81,000 at a potential peak for this cycle if the 5.4 diminishing point goes through and continues to maintain. Now again, that is just math. That is literally going through pulling from the bear market bottom to the bull market peak, and then dividing that number by 5.4, and then by the time we figure out what the bottom is, generally within a few percent or so, that ends up forecasting what the next peak ends up going through and being. And so again, that's where we went through. We figured out what the peak was for this cycle. We came down, we figured out what the bear market low was for this cycle, and it forecasts an approximate 400% gain, give or take, just kind of with where things are, and that's where we get this $75 to $81,000 level, which gives us that little bit of forgiveness. Now, if that ends up going through and breaking, then the 5.4 approximation is 100%. This time is definitively different. And again, I think that we would need something like that, this time indeed being different for us to go through and challenge the $100,000 level. Okay. All right. So after Bitcoin, I do want to talk a little bit about ETH BTC this week, because this is something that I just want to make sure people are kind of aware of, as it is just kind of my overall larger concern when it comes to ETH BTC. Now, again, I am very bullish on Ethereum. I think that it will continue to go through and do very well when this overall trend breaks. My primary concern when it comes to this bull market specifically is if we can get above this macro ascending line that we've been following, that does date all the way back into Ethereum's super early days in 2016, where we held all throughout the last bear market, held it as support, and this past cycle, during all of this time, during the time Bitcoin's gone through and moved and absolutely been crushing it. It's remained one inside the descending descending channel that's been going on since basically the bear market had gone through and started, and now even after the bull market has gone through and began, ETH BTC is really struggling to go through and break up above through here, paired with not being able to confidently break above this ascending trend line again, that dates all the way back over here, 2017. This is the most important trend line in all of ETH BTC's history. So with that being said, should we go through and continue to maintain this as resistance, I think it will stifle to an immense degree the overall gains that Ethereum could potentially go through and happen for this cycle. That doesn't mean that, ETH BTC can't come back through and essentially follow this, all the way up, maybe come back into around like the 0.08 territory before, basically the next bear market happens. But this would be extremely concerning to me if we cannot see ETH BTC break back up above there. Why? Because then at that point in time, we could 100% look at this as one big deviation of a big, massive macro trend. And then at that point in time, I think that would be one of the leading events that we could see ETH BTC actually go through and take out last cycle's highs. I think that these would be very significant. This 0.08 to, I believe, 0.09, or I'm sorry, 0.05, 0.085. These are going to be very, very significant levels of resistance for ETH BTC. But I do think that as long as we can potentially go through and break back above this macro uptrend, then at that point in time, I think that it's possible, absolutely possible, we could see ETH BTC actually come back through and start to challenge some of its prior all-time highs, potentially looking at something like, 0.2 ETH BTC. So basically taking 5 Ethereum for 1 Bitcoin, which would be absolutely, absolutely massive. Absolutely exciting to see if we could see something like that go through and take place. So, okay. Outside of that, a few altcoins. Jupiter, geez, oh man, putting in a new all-time high this week. Yes, I know it is in the process of pulling back a little bit now, but that's okay. It just put in a new all-time high, so I will take that. Even if we were to go through and come back and back test 87 cents and then go through and rally on from there. Absolutely exciting to see. I had encouraged and talked to quite a few people about accumulating back over here between 47, 50 cents. And so this has just been absolutely fun during all of this. Some of the other different altcoins that I know that we've gone through and we've talked about to a much larger degree, Paal being one of them. Paal seeing, a little bit more of a pullback, but so far we have had a pretty decent bounce as of last week. Now it is going to be interesting to see if we can go through and continue to hold that. Again, my overall targets for Paal for this cycle are going to be between $3 to $9, which I think is going to be extremely likely for this to go through and do. Honestly, it probably could even go higher than that, but I will 100% be taking profits between $3 to $9, and then I'll probably still have a decent sized bag left to ride for anything else that could potentially go through and happen. But this one is just such a I mean, honestly, it's a beautiful formation, really kind of sticking within the confines of this ascending channel. And I think that even if we saw one time where it goes through and breaks out above that, that would just be absolutely, absolutely massive to see, and really, really, really fun. um, Link, I know not very many people talk about Link, but Link, honestly, it keeps giving us just these absolutely perfect bullish formations going through and being formed, where we go through and yes, we consolidated for a very, very long time, but we had a very good, strong breakout, consolidated below resistance, and now we're going through and breaking above resistance, trying to go through and hold that as support. I do think that should we go through and we end up holding this, confirming this as support, I think it's only a matter of time before Link goes through and snaps to $37 and starts to go through and challenge that. Until then, ultimately coming in to challenge basically its prior all-time high into the $50 level and potentially beyond. Now, the one thing that would have me a little bit concerned is if short term we ended up seeing a little bit of potentially a deviation kind of form where, maybe this ends up going through closing as resistance. Maybe Link comes back through and just kind of tests the midpoint between the highs that we established over here and the lows that we established over here before then confidently breaking back above. And then going back in to challenge some of these highs that we had established over here, $36, $37. That's 100% possible. But either way, Link, this is one that I am bullish on for this cycle. I think that the um, interchangeability and being able to go through and track other different blockchains and keep everything all in uniform. I think that sort of technology, it's going to be massive for this cycle and for the future. Some of the other altcoins, honestly, a lot of them have experienced pretty significant pullbacks. We won't 100% get into all of the other ones, but one of the things that you can do is honestly just look at total 3 and keep track of just kind of where this is, how this is overall behaving. I do think that as long as we can hold 700 billion, then at that point in time, we'll likely go back through and re-challenge not only just the local high, but re-challenge 822 billion for the altcoin space. If this ends up going through and closing as resistance, honestly, again, even if we saw, potentially coming in through and back testing 600 billion, that is not a reason to get overly bearish. This would be viewed as an absolutely bullish opportunity, an absolutely awesome opportunity to go through and accumulate for the remaining portion of this cycle. Um, you know, at that point in time, you can literally view any of these times we saw significant pullbacks into critical levels of support, and every single time, regardless of what asset you're pretty much looking at, especially during a bullish bull market, it tends to end up being very, very well. Now, I'm not trying to sound doom and gloom here because I don't think that it will happen. But if we ended up going through and seeing something where we go through and we start testing 602, and we end up going through and starting to close that and hold that as resistance, we may have to go back to the drawing board completely, and kind of analyze a lot of different things in regards to cycle theory and just kind of where we personally believe we are in the market cycle as a whole. But right now, I don't see that as happening. Again, I think worst case would be maybe if the altcoins aren't able to hold 700 billion and we end up coming into 600 billion. Really, then after that, moving on, and probably the move after that comes in to challenge the prior all-time highs before going through and making new all-time highs of its own. And it would be absolutely awesome to see something like the altcoin market come in and probably challenge the $2 trillion mark and maybe even beyond. That would be absolutely, absolutely massive for this cycle. But all right, I think with that, um, this week I'm probably not going to be trading too much because I again I know I talked on it a little bit earlier this in this week's I guess I don't know, market talk, market update. I got to figure out a name for this thing now. But anyhow, yeah, I really kind of want to see how this weekly candle goes through and closes. Um, I think if anything, if we ended up seeing a 20% correction, the only thing I would really be looking to do would just be to accumulate and then maybe look for potentially some form of support, and then go through and potentially go through and look for longs. Um, but at that point in time, I would rather, I'm not confident in long positions here. I'm not confident in short positions here, because again, we could end up going through closing the week out in a positive note, and then we just see bullish, continuation, meaning that if this week ends up going through and closing in a positive note, then at that point in time, the following week, I would be looking for a break of structure and then a takeout, a break of formation above whatever new high after, potentially a shorter term back test. So if we were to go through and let's just say we're going to zoom in real close Now, obviously, this could go through and happen this week. I'm personally not, I'm personally not really expecting it to go through and kind of happen this week specifically. But let's just say the following week, we go through and we start to break up above and start flipping this into support. We kind of establish an initial high after going through and really holding support. As soon as we would go through and break above that, that would be a really good solid entry for any new potential fresh long positions. Again, I'd be pretty cautious between 75 to 81. And you could probably even just do something as simple as whatever low ends up being formed, if the low is, potentially in to just kind of where we are, quite literally just go through and just pull something as simple as kind of an extension to maybe go through and look at different targets, um, 75, 78, 82. But again, keeping in mind, potential concerns when it comes to diminishing factors when it comes to Bitcoin. I do expect the 75 to 81 level to be kind of a pretty significant mind level when it comes to Bitcoin. It probably won't end up being the market cycle top for this cycle, but it is going to be a significant level, I think, when it comes to the mentality of current people participating within the markets. So any shorter term trade, any long trade that you would potentially look at doing, I would definitely make sure that you're taking profits along the way and adjusting stops to a bar minimum once the first round of profits are secured to break even. Because worst case, the trade comes back through, reverses on you, and you're stopped out, and you've lost nothing. You've already gone through and you've secured profits, and who knows? Maybe the exact same trade goes through and gets set up again. You execute the exact same trade, do the exact same thing, and maybe that's the time that the trade goes through and moves on from there. So, all right, I think with that we'll go ahead and wrap up for um, this week's episode. I don't know. Again, I got to figure out what to call this thing now. But all right, yeah. Thanks for watching. Thanks for coming and hanging out. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I will do my best to get back to you.